Hello, everyone. Welcome to listening to Lancaster. I'm Diana Martin with Hourglass, and it's my pleasure to be joined today by Cindy McCormick, Deputy Director of Engineering for the City of Lancaster. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we're going to be chatting about Vision Zero, which is the city's goal to eliminate traffic related deaths and serious injuries by 2030. The city recently received a $12.7 million Safe Streets for All grant to implement its Vision Zero strategy. Today, and congrats on that, by the way. That's
Yeah, we're
um,
super excited. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's one of the largest grants that the city's ever gotten.
Yeah.
So that's a big success. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how those funds are going to be used and what we can expect in the future from the Vision Zero plan. Um, so as we jump in, we're going to talk a lot about that. But I just wanted to give people a chance to get to know you a little bit, Cindy. Can you talk about what you do at the city and how long you've been there?
Sure. I've been with the city for 7 years. So, I've spent over 25 years in the engineering consulting world. So coming to the city was sort of a big change for me. But, I continue to be amazed at like all the work that, city employees do, particularly in the Department of Public Works where I am. So I did just want to give a shout out. This is National Public Works Week when we're recording this. So I just wanted to give a shout out to my fellow workers who, do a lot of work within the city, a lot of work that people don't see every day, everything from, the streets, the water that comes to your house, everything that people take for granted. So I just want to give a shout out to them. But yeah, I am a deputy director in the Department of Public Works, and I oversee the public right of way. And I'm also managing the stormwater bureau as well in the interim as we look for more leadership in that area. But I work with a team of planners and engineers. We do a lot of looking at how we can make our streets better, make our parks better, stormwater infrastructure. We manage the permitting process for all the work that's done within the right of way, so the streets and sidewalks. And we develop master plans. I know we just were at the comprehensive plan event last night, but they talked about a lot of plans that Department of Public Works is involved in, like the active transportation plan, the parks master plan and Vision Zero. So, and then we get to identify projects from those plans and actually implement them, work with designers to have them designed and take them to construction. So it's a really full circle job that you enjoy seeing it from the planning process all the way through to completion.
Well, let's zoom in a little bit more on Vision Zero. Can you give people some background on Vision Zero who maybe have never heard of it? I know, cities are part of this really all over the world. So why did Lancaster decide to adopt a Vision Zero plan back in 2020?
Right. So Vision Zero is, the vision of having zero fatal and serious injury crashes on our roadways. I know, and as you mentioned, it's a nationwide or international initiative that's, happening all over the world. But, especially in the United States, I think we've become numb to the amount of fatalities that happen on our roads every year. There's over, 42,000 fatalities every year in the United States. And over, the latest in Pennsylvania was 1,179 fatalities. So, the last year that was reported, but this, and that number happens every year. So I think, treating traffic safety more as a public health issue rather than, just something that we have to accept. So, putting more resources into that and trying to, prevent those from happening. And that's what Vision Zero is more about. Like we do have the ability to prevent this from happening. So, it's also approaching it from the fact that deaths and serious injuries aren't acceptable, so we're not numb to that stat anymore. It's also accepting that humans make mistakes. So how can we design our systems to account for the fact that humans make mistakes? Often when you talk about crashes, it's because this motorist did this or this pedestrian did that. And it's more like blaming the victims of the crashes rather than trying to look at it from a holistic approach. So, noting that the humans are vulnerable as well. So pedestrians and bicycles are especially vulnerable. The responsibility is shared and that safety should be proactive and redundancy is critical. So when we talked about the safe roads, designing our roads to be safer, safe road users, so making sure people are educated about the ramifications of their actions, safer vehicles, safer speeds. Speeds is a huge thing that we really want to focus on. So, the reason that we got into Vision Zero was the mayor's strategic goals were one of the first ones was safe streets. At the same time, I was working with Walkworks on some of their work as far as active transportation and complete streets, and they encouraged us to apply for a Vision Zero plan because that was one of the things they were encouraging to help people be, they want to make it safer for people to or make people feel safe in doing active transportation or just walking or biking in their neighborhood. So Vision Zero aligned with that. So from there, just we had the mayor's support and we leaned into that that idea, and we've just been keeping it moving from there.
So you put together a Vision Zero action plan, and we'll share a link to that so people can check out the full plan. In doing that, you analyzed a lot of data about crashes in the city. Looking at all that data, what did you learn about where crashes are happening, who they're impacting, what's causing them?
Right. So yeah, there's crashes throughout the city. It's not, there's not any one area that that we, aren't experiencing crashes. We did find that, the majority of crashes, over 70%, were happening on our state routes. So those higher speed facilities are where the majority of those fatal and severe crashes are happening. I would say the killed and seriously injured crashes, they're impacting pedestrians far more than would be represented by the number of people that commute as a pedestrian. So 30% of those crashes that happen to be pedestrians. So yeah, even in 2021, 52 pedestrians were involved in crashes within the city. So that's, a lot of people being involved in those kind of crashes. Aggressive driving was noted as in 60% of the crashes. So trying to control speeds is one of the things that we're really focused on. And left turning vehicles was also left turning vehicles were involved in about 1/5 of those fatal and serious injury crashes. So we know that left turns can be very dangerous, especially for pedestrians as well.
How does that data compare to maybe other cities of our size? What does our crash data look like?
So when we did the plan, the data was from 2014 to 2018. We had 73 severe and fatal crashes in that time period. Similar sized cities like Hoboken, New Jersey had 13. So we're like up there as far as the number of crashes that are serious and fatal. Bethlehem also, they had 52 in that time period. So I think, we definitely have work to do in trying to improve safety.
One of the things that you did after you analyzed that data was you came up with something called the High Injury Network. What is that High Injury Network?
It's basically where we've identified that these serious and fatal injury crashes are happening most prevalently. So yeah, that's where we want to focus our efforts because that's where these crashes are happening. And also it did take into account where maybe more pedestrian crashes were happening as well.
What are some of the streets in that High Injury Network?
A lot of the streets are our state routes, such as Prince Street, Queen Street, King and Orange. Some of the maybe non-state routes included Water Street, Ann Street, some of those locations where we still see it. There's a lot of volume or a lot of cut through traffic. We're seeing crashes in those locations as well.
So you've analyzed the data. Obviously, you said we have a lot of work to do when it comes to improving, especially our pedestrian, cyclist safety in the city. So what are some of the recommendations that came out of the city's Vision Zero action plan that we can start to tackle some of these issues?
So yeah, the four goals that we had for the plan included equity, safety, culture change, and data. So from the equity side, we're wanting to make sure that we're engaging community in the process and identifying improvements that in areas that they want to see them. But also we did find as well that there were slightly more crashes in the historically underserved areas. So we're wanting to make sure that we're putting extra focus on those areas as well. Obviously, from the safety side, there's roadway improvements that we could be making, evaluating the speed limits, improving crosswalks and lighting, working around schools because we know we want to prioritize school areas, neighborhood slow zones, and sort of quick builds like trying to improve the sight lines at intersections. We call it daylighting, where we would put in some cross hatching or maybe some vertical elements like delineators to try and keep people from parking too close to intersections to make sure pedestrians are more visible, and that it also improves safety for vehicles as well, so they have better sight lines. So those are some of the things we're talking about as far as the recommendations. The culture change, we're wanting to prioritize safety, again, trying to get people to think more about why safety is important, working with our partners to educate people. And then also, as I talked about before, maybe less victim blaming. So just trying to get people out of their cars. I think that was one of the things that I talked a lot about last night at the comprehensive plan, rolling that out, is looking at, providing better options for alternative modes and making people feel safe walking and biking so that they feel like they don't need to get in their car to get from point A to point B. That would be very helpful. And then, the data part of it is just making sure that we're continuing to look at the data and make adjustments to where we should be focusing. Our focus, the beginning is obviously dealing with all those issues where we know there are issues, but we also know that crashes can be kind of random as well. So maybe where, crashes may happen at this intersection versus another one. So just trying to identify those factors that lead to crashes as well and being more proactive in making improvements.
I'd say I'm a city resident. I've even noticed just in the last couple weeks some of the daylighting that you mentioned with more pedestrian crossing areas being highlighted or restricting some of the parking close to those crossing areas. So I've been seeing some of the changes.
Yes. We've been getting a lot of positive feedback about that. That's been happening even in the last couple of weeks.
One of the things that I've heard some discussion on, the city has converted a few one-way streets back to two-way as a way to improve traffic safety. That's I think one of the recommendations that you're considering, even for more streets in the future. Maybe
Yep.
I've heard Lime Street or Duke Street, a few different possibilities. Can you just talk a little bit about how does converting a one-way street to a two-way street make that safer?
The Charlotte Street and Mulberry Street are great examples of, how converting that could change the look and feel of the street in general. When we take a 2-lane one-way road and make it 2 lanes in 2 directions, that just changes the whole look and feel. It makes people need to be more observant. They need to be more cognizant of what's going on. It also, doesn't give people the opportunity to be zooming around other people, sort of those weaving back and forth. It's just naturally and that's part of what we want to do when we're designing our streets, is naturally slow people down. The environment has a big impact on the speeds that people will travel. So if we create an environment that people get the feeling that they need to slow down, then we're doing our job without, just posting the speed limit to be something that maybe people feel safer, going faster. Then, we want to make sure that we're creating the environment where people would be driving to the environment.
Yeah, so kind of designing streets with the intention around safe streets. I think that's definitely something, it seems like it's getting a lot of traction, that we can't just put it on the human behavior for people to expect them to maybe slow down, that some of it is a design element that can get
Right,
people to
right,
adopt those behaviors.
right.
So you mentioned that the high injury network, the majority of those are state roads. So what does that look like? How do we kind of coordinate this work with PennDOT? Where does that give us challenges around improving the safety of those streets?
Yeah, so a lot of, any improvements that we make on state roads or suggest to make on state roads, we need to get PennDOT's buy-in on that. Um, we've been working with them on, we worked on them on Highland Avenue as a project where we did some traffic calming. So, we have been able to work with them successfully on implementing the improvements that we like to, would like to see. We have the Safe Streets for All grant, which was administered by the Federal Highway. So that's sort of a layer above PennDOT. And I know that, PennDOT had to sign off on our application as well. So they, are aware of what we're hoping to accomplish. I also think that this program may help educate PennDOT more on maybe some best practices. And with FHWA administering the project, that they'll be encouraged to, think about things a little bit differently. I know, one thing with PennDOT is they don't deal in the urban environment every day in their everyday work. So sometimes when a city comes to them with improvements, they may be a little hesitant. But I think, if we're all working together, we can sort of show them how some of these best practices that other cities are implementing can work for a city like Lancaster. So I'm confident that we can work with them.
So what's the plan for the $12.7 million in new grant funding? How are we going to see that implemented in the community?
So yeah, we have a lot of different improvements identified with that work. So you mentioned the high injury network. We have projects where we'll be working on either segments, lengths of roadway, as well as intersections that we've identified. We've identified, I think, 5 segments and 9 intersections as part of the grant. We've identified working around 5 schools. We've identified additional studies. You mentioned the one-way to two-way. So part of that grant is studying, where that makes sense. So looking at it from a holistic standpoint, from the city, and which streets maybe should we consider converting to two-way, and what would that look like? And if we still have time, the grant is a 5-year time period. Once we get those recommendations, we would like to be able to implement a segment or two with some of that funding as well. So we also are looking at more systemic type improvements. So you mentioned the upgrading the crosswalks and the daylighting that we've just recently done. We'd like to continue that and expand that into other areas. Looking at lighting is another area, and then there's a large public engagement portion of that as well, where we're reaching out to the public about projects that we're doing or would like to do. And then also just education around it as well, why it's important, why, as part of that redundancy, making sure we have safe users of the system. So educating people on how to be safer users of the system as well.
You mentioned you work with some other partners on this work. Who are some of your other partners?
Obviously within the city, we have a lot of different, the police and, other departments that help us as well. But the school district is always a great partner, working with the transit authority, a lot of neighborhood groups as well. We are starting to reach out to them as well to try and identify advocates that can help us the message out. We are just launching our first education and outreach campaign related to Vision Zero at the mayor's neighborhood events. We were handing out slow down signs and those kind of things, and trying to educate people about our program. So actually giving them the resources as well to go out and try and get the word out about why it's important.
And I imagine some of the work that you want to do, it can be pretty expensive, right? Because we're talking about infrastructure. How does that kind of 12.7 million fit into the overall cost of the improvements that we need to make under the Vision Zero plan?
So we're very fortunate, and that's a large portion of what what was recommended in the plan to accomplish. We didn't actually do a full-blown cost estimate of what all the improvements would be, but we had an implementation plan that, this laid out the next 5 years. So I would imagine that maybe we would need a similar amount, for the next 5 years, but it's hard to say at this point how much all that would cost.
So this grant funding is really speeding up the timeline for some of this implementation.
Absolutely. Yes, it definitely put us in a much better position to get this implemented.
Mhm. One of the areas that you mentioned is a priority for Vision Zero is schools. How are you working with some of those schools to improve traffic safety?
So we've been working with the school district. They helped us identify projects like new capital projects they're working on, like if they're doing renovations or doing doing projects at schools already, how we can tune into those and assist with those projects. We also, are trying to work more with the staff on curriculum, or even educating the staff on how, about Vision Zero, so they can be, relaying that information to their students as well. So those were some of the ways that we were hoping to engage. We also, there is some interest as well in trying to sort of reactivate a Safe Routes to School program, trying to identify how to make it safer for kids to be able to walk and bike. So those are just some of the ways. We're still very early in the development process of some of the initiatives.
So, you talked about, for example, converting Charlotte Street and Mulberry Street. What are some other recently completed Vision Zero projects that people might be able to see out in the city if they're interested in this topic? And what can we expect in the future that we should keep our eyes peeled for?
Yeah, so you had mentioned the daylighting as well that you noticed. So that's one of our most recent projects, and that's more what we would call like a quick build, because it's some paint and delineators on the roadway, so that can be implemented pretty quickly. Some other projects, I mentioned Highland Avenue was a project where we were trying to reduce the speeds of traffic that's coming into the city. Some of those gateway corridors we know can be tough to slow down speed. So we had incorporated green infrastructure into that project, some speed feedback signs, just trying to make people, narrowing the street to again, make people feel like they need to slow down as they enter the city. Some older projects like Plum and Walnut was also a safety project. That was a green infrastructure project as well. Obviously the Walnut Street bike lane, anytime we're implementing bike infrastructure as well, we're hoping that it's creating a traffic calming effect and changing the way people drive as well. And we do have a lot of projects that are coming down the pike, I guess. A lot of them that are in design right now. We have Lemon Street, the bike lane that will be installed there later this year. Christian Street is also, we have a project that's under construction right now between Orange and Chestnut. And that includes some intersection improvements at Christian Street, at Chestnut Street and at Orange Street. So trying to improve the pedestrian bike connectivity along Christian, but then also trying to improve the safety along Chestnut Street and Orange Street by putting some curb bump outs. Orange Street's going to include rapid flashing beacons, so trying to highlight for pedestrians and bikes crossing there. We also have on South Duke Street, we'll be doing a project, probably starting construction later this year or next year. So there's a lot going on in the city that, and more information will be posted on the Vision Zero website as we're working on these projects. And our Engage website, also has a lot of information about projects that we're currently working on as well.
So, how does our crash data stand today, 2 years after adopting our first Vision Zero plan? Kind of what's the direction that we're trending in, and what's your hope towards the future as we work towards 2030?
yeah, obviously the hope is that we eliminate all those fatal and serious crashes. We are still, from 2018 was the last year of the plan, the data in the plan, even though we adopted it in 2020. The crash data comes a little bit later. So we do have data up to 2021. 2019 was a really high year for us. So, and then, it's reduced a little bit, but we're pretty flat. I would say we still have a ways to go. We're still in that 20 serious and fatal injury crashes range. So we do have work to do, but I'm very hopeful that, as we continue to make people more aware of this program and why it's important, and then also trying and getting some of these projects in the ground over the next 2 years, the ones that we have in design now, and then over the next 5 years, implementing that Safe Streets for All grant. I think over the next 5 years, we can significantly reduce that number.
Is there anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to add? And I also just wanted to give you a chance to shout out maybe those websites again, where if people who are listening want to get involved or at least stay up to date on this information, what the best place is for those resources.
Right. We have a Vision Zero webpage on the City of Lancaster webpage that people can find there. And as I mentioned, we have our Engage platform, which is our way of engaging with our residents about projects. We sort of show the timeline of the projects and where we are in the project, so they can sort of follow along and get additional information. So the Engage website is also, sorry, I don't have the actual website, but you can do a search on Engage Lancaster and you would find that pretty easily.
Yeah, we'll include that link with the resources in this episode.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that I want to stress is the notion of slowing down when people are driving and considering alternative transportation. In the City of Lancaster, the speed limits are 25 miles an hour for almost every street. So in an urban environment, going 10 miles over the speed limit, it doesn't, it's not very safe, because, I know most people think, well, I can't get a ticket if as long as I'm going 10 miles, less than 10 miles over the speed limit, I'm good. But in an urban environment, that really has an impact. If there's that makes the difference between if you happen to hit a pedestrian because people make mistakes, then there's a greater chance that someone would die if you hit them at a higher speed than if you're going slower. Slower makes everything a little bit better. So, and encourage everyone to slow down as they're traveling through the city, and consider using alternative modes like biking or walking, rather than taking that half mile for the car ride or a mile for a car ride. So,
well, this work is really vital to our quality of life here in the city, that everyone deserves to be able to get safely to their destination,
right.
their work, their school, the places that we want to enjoy together downtown. So I think this work is really vital. I'm so grateful that you all got this grant, and thank you for coming on today to talk a little bit more about how we're working towards safer streets in the City of Lancaster. And we know that we're just in the early stages and there's a lot to come. So definitely urge everyone who's listening to find out a little bit more about Vision Zero and ways that we can get involved. And for anyone who's listening, if you want to hear more episodes of Listening to Lancaster, you can do that on our YouTube channel or at our website at hourglasslancaster.org. So thank you so much for being here today, Cindy, and excited to get on that Lemon Street bike lane once that's added to our city bike lane network. So thanks for all the work.
Thank you, Diana. I appreciate it.